This is Joseph Gambucci. He was born on July 17, 1920. He served in the U.S. Air Force. He served in World War II, in the China-Burma Indian Campaign, and also in the Korean War. His highest rank was Major. It is April 2nd, 2011, in Northfield, Minnesota. Joe is being interviewed by Kyle Betcher, a friend. He is assisted by Jane Gambucci and Krista Betcher. This interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. Were you drafted or enlisted?
I was drafted.
Where were you living at the time?
In Hibbing, Minnesota.
Do you recall your first days in service?
Yeah, I was drafted into the infantry at first, but I wanted to fly airplanes, so I was anxious to get in the Air Force.
What did it feel like?
Well, I was in the infantry. I didn't want to be a foot soldier carrying, shooting in a war, so I wanted to fly airplanes. So I was anxious to get out of the infantry into the Air Force.
And tell me about your boot camp and training experiences.
Well, the boot camp was this basic training with rifles and jogging. We had a forced march every day and so forth. So I was not very happy to stay in the infantry. And a lieutenant in charge of my unit got me to transfer to the Air Corps. So that was the first introduction to the Air Force. I was at least able to pursue my career as a pilot, so I was lucky to get in.
Which wars did you serve in?
Served in World War II and Korea both.
Where exactly did you go?
In World War II, when I was went through pilot training, I was stationed in Bergstrom Airfield in Texas. Then I was transferred to Burma, China, Burma, India, and went to India first as a combat instructor pilot, and we had missions helping the British and the Indian Army fighting the Japanese and pushing them out of Burma. And our main reason for doing there was to furnish the British Army with food and supplies, and every day we would fly into the combat zone into Burma, and so I had up to 3 missions a day supplying them. And during the war they were fighting the Japanese, and as their troops advanced through the jungle, we would drop ammunition to the British, so you wouldn't have to carry a lot of ammunition with them. And it caused the Japanese to keep retreating. So finally, the Indian Army and the British Army won the war in Burma, and we were able to get all the pilots out of there. And during one of my missions, I had a boar shell come out to the belly of my airplane, and that's why I got wounded in the leg, and that's why I got the Purple Heart. And ever since then, well, we had after the Burma campaign was over, I was transferred back to the United States, and they were letting us out of the service because the war in Europe, the Nazis were defended, and they were all beat. So the war in Europe was gone. So they let us out early during the Japanese campaign. So I was out until 1957 when President Truman declared war against Korea, and I was drafted back into the service as a combat instructor pilot with the Royal Thailand Air Force. So I was instructing the Thailand Air Force on combat missions into Korea. So I spent most of my time until the Korean War was ended, and then I switched over to the regular Air Force, and I was able to stay in, and they transferred me to a C-130 unit in Columbus, Ohio, and that's where I retired in 1967.
What was your job or assignment?
I was officially the procurement officer, and I was building housing for the radar satellite units, and I was building houses for them and contracting for them. And at the same time, I was a pilot instructor at that time. And I was transferred to C-130 in Columbus, Ohio, and I stayed in the C-130 unit until I retired in 1967.
Did you see combat?
Yes, I had a lot of combat, especially during Korea. I got 378 combat missions supplying the British Army. And during the Korean War, I was supplying the British Army and Army and British Army in Korea, and they were fighting North Korea at the same time. So I had about a lot of combat missions as an instructor pilot. So that's the end of my career.
Tell me about a couple of your most memorable experiences.
Well, my first experience was when I got shot down in Burma after a Jap's mortar shell hit me on the belly of my aircraft, and I was forced to land there. And I was lucky because the mortar shell was right in the middle of my airplane. 3 feet either way would have hit a gas tank, or I was carrying a load of grenades and mortar shells, and it would have blown up the whole airplane. So I was very lucky where I got hit.
Is there another experience?
Okay, yeah. We used to fly into where they were training guard dogs for sentry duty, and at that time they were only training the dogs for sentry protection. And later on, in the 1950s, they started training dogs for multi-purposes. Some dogs were trained for finding out contraband issue and dope and so forth, and the other dogs were trained strictly for perimeter defense. So at the time, the dogs were serving a very, very valuable purpose to our support. So we're picking out the dogs that are trained and they were kept in wooden crates. So they loaded the wooden crates onto the airplane, and they loaded about 12 crates for our airplane. And in order to get in the cockpit, we had to climb over the wooden crates, and we didn't dare put our fingers between cracks in the crates because the dogs are really trying to get at us. They were trained for combat, and they're very good defense.
Were you awarded any medals or citations?
Yes, I got 38 medals and awards, and during the combat, for every 100 hours in combat training, we got a Distinguished Flying Cross. And every 300 hours of combat training, we got the Air Medal. So I had about over 1,000 hours combat, so I got 5 Air Medals and 4 Distinguished Flying Crosses. And the Chinese government gave us the Chinese War Medal for our saving the Chinese from the Japanese. And then I got all the others were, well, either combat missions or the time spent in the service, or when we were in the Pacific Aviation Theater, we would get a medal for them, and for the Korean War and all the other battles I was in, we got a citation or medal for each one.
How did you get your Purple Heart?
Well, during one of my combat missions in Burma, the Japs mortar shell exploded in the belly of my airplane, and they got some shrapnel wounds in my leg. So that's what they awarded me the Purple Heart for combat missions. But all the other missions were because of combat time or time spent in the theater.
How did you stay in touch with your family?
Well, during World War II, we had telegrams we could send back and forth. That's why we kept in touch with our family. And we got letters in the mail too. So that's the only communication we had with our family. And after I came back from the war, I was stationed where I had the family with me. So I was lucky to be able to keep my family where I was stationed in Japan. They were with me in Japan. In fact, my daughter was born in Japan. And when I came back to Duluth, I had my family with me. But during the war, we were fed with the British provision for British and the Indian Army, and the food was terrible. I lost about 30 pounds with eating terrible food. And in the meantime, when we were supplying the British during the war, we were dropping their mail, live sheep, and everything they needed for them. And we fed them better than we got fed. So the food is terrible.
Are there any other family memories?
Yes, when I was during the war in Burma, I had a friend that was from Hibbing too, and he got the word before I did that I had a son. That's the first word I got that I had my firstborn son was Joe Jr. So he's the one that told me I had a son. I was happy to hear that.
Did you have plenty of supplies?
Well, no, we never had enough supplies, but we scrounged everything we needed. And we had only showers or cold water showers, so I rigged up a water heating system with oil barrels and hooked up a hot water shower. So we were the only outfit in the whole theater that had hot water showers, and all the pilots would call to our base so they could have a hot water shower. So, and one of the guys left the burners on, and the steam blew up the thing, so everything was destroyed. So from then on, it was cold water showers again.
How did people entertain themselves?
Well, we didn't have much time for entertaining. We flew from 4 in the morning and until dark at night when we got back. So we were happy to just go to bed and get some rest. But in order to get some diversion, I made a deck of cards out of newspaper clippings, and I made my own deck of cards. So we were able to play Jed Brumby and so forth with homemade cards. We didn't have much time for getting leave. All of our time was spent just flying, and when we were able to, we got a flight to Calcutta to get some fresh groceries and vegetables, and that's the only time we had fresh eggs for breakfast. So until the war was ended in Burma, we were loaded back on the ship and came back home to rest and leave, and that's when we were relieved from active duty.
Do you recall any particularly humorous or unusual events?
Well, yeah, a couple of times. When I was first asked to fly C-46s, we transferred from C-47 to C-46s. On my first flight back home with the C-46, the left gear wouldn't work, so we had to circle back and forth until our crew chief went on in the basement of the C-46 and cranked the gear down by hand so we could land. That was only the scariest part. Otherwise, the C-46 was a very good airplane.
What were some of the pranks that you or others would pull?
Well, we didn't have much time for any pranks, but my two buddies, they were always after Captain Sutherland because he was always making fun of us. So every time he got drunk, they would put him in a stretch bench. So the two buddies saw that he was down in the stretch bench, passed out, and he could have drowned in there. So they jumped in, pulled him back out. Otherwise, we got back for Captain Sutherland for his sarcasm.
Did you have any other unusual events?
Well, on one of my flights with the C-130, we were shooting landings, and command and control called us and said we were sent to Bermuda to pick up a sailor. So we had to fly to Bermuda, and every time we went past the national border, we had to call in at the command control, telling them that we were leaving the identification zone. And I called in and told them Cherry Point Marine Station, the Air Force so-and-so, we were leaving the air defense zone. So they never answered me after that. And we kept calling, by the pilot says, I could dial the HF radio, that goes all the way around the world. So he tried that, and he couldn't get anybody to answer. In the meantime, the navigator says, our Doppler radar says our ground speed is about 900 miles an hour, and the C-130 doesn't fly that fast. Well, our ground speed is only 150. So it's instead of taking 3 hours to get to Bermuda, about an hour and 20 minutes after leaving the States, we saw the lights on the horizon, and I dialed the radio station in Bermuda, and he says, yes, this is our Bermuda Air Force, this ship, blinking lights, so we could see if you are there. So we blinked the lights, and said, we got you in sight, so you're cleared to land. And it took us an hour and 30 minutes instead of taking 3 hours. And if we didn't hit the target right on the nose, we would have lost, and just lost forever, like the rest of the series in the Bermuda Triangle. So the next morning we got to our airplane. A radio man says, come here, I want to show you something. So he turned the radio on. It says, Cherry Point Marine Station, this is Air Force so-and-so. And he came back loud and clear. We got you loud and clear. And we said, well, what's the effects on the radio? He said, I never touched the radio. This is the way I found it in the morning. It was working fine. So one of the Bermuda Triangle's mystery, we were lucky to escape.
Do you have any more memories you'd like to share?
Well, one thing was kind of weird. When we were flying the Japanese prisoners of war back from Bishana back to India, they had 21 Japanese prisoners, and the guards who guard them were the Indian Army, the Naga Indian Wars, and they were guarding the prisoners. And when we got back to India, they had only 20 prisoners of war instead of 21. So they dropped one of them out of the airplane, just threw him out. But they were fearless fighters, Naga Indian Wars. They got paid by the British government for every Japanese they killed. They cut their ears off, and they get $20 for every pair of ears they were brought back for Japanese prisoners. So lucky they were on our side.
Do you have anything to remind you of your service?
Yeah, a couple of incidents came to my mind. on one flight that we had to Bamo in north of Burma, we had a load of 500-pound bombs to carry for the fighter squadron, and one of the crew members was captain from the OSI. It's the Office of Special Investigation. And when we got to unloaded the bombs, we flew over Jap trenches. In the daytime, the Japs would go underground and stay underground all day until they come out at night. And they had limited ammunition and supplies, so they were in a pretty hard shape for fighting a war. So on the way home, the captain says, we fly right over these trenches, and why don't we keep one of those bombs here and drop it over the trenches on the way home? So we flew 300 feet over the trenches, and we dropped the bomb, one bomb we kept, and blew rocks and sand and dirt almost all the way off to our airplane up at that time. And when we got back to our base in India, Bob Fisher was the operations officer, so he listed himself as a pilot of this trip. And when we got there, we saw our squadron commander, Johnny Langford, and we went up to him and said, boy, wait till you hear what we did. And he says, I know what you did. He said, for 3 days we were dropping peace pamphlets for them, telling them if they give up, we won't shoot at them. And so General Krabs said, I want you and Fisher in front of my desk at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. They almost got gorse marks over that. So it was kind of amusing. And the importance that came to my mind when I got my samurai sword. I have had a genuine samurai sword, and on a flight home from Bishada, which is the last stronghold for the Japs, I stopped and ran out, and this Jap colonel had the samurai sword on him, so I got it and I kept it. When I was assigned to Japan, I brought my samurai sword with me, and there's a gentleman in Tokyo that puts the history of the family that had the sword inside the handle. So I brought the sword back to him so he could identify the family and return the sword to them. And he couldn't find any family members surviving. They were all killed during the bombing raids. So I had to keep the sword myself, and I still have it then.
Tokyo Rose and the Chinese restaurant.
Close to our base was a Chinese restaurant. We all used to go there because the food was better than the mess hall. And they would listen to all of our conversations, our missions, our schedules, and all that. And it turned out they were Japanese spies, and they would relay the information they got to Tokyo Rose, and she would broadcast it on the radio every morning, and bragging about how they knew exactly what we were going to do and what our missions were and where we're going and so forth. So it took quite a while for the divulge that they were Japanese spies, so they closed the restaurant immediately.
How were you treated as a pilot?
Well, we were treated pretty good. we got enough food and ammunition, and every month we got a quart of brandy for rations, so we were able to at least get some of the brandy after our missions. We would come back and have a glass of brandy. So we were treated very good.
Do you recall the day your service ended?
Yes, I recall very good, because I was offered a job with the Department of Commerce, Economic Development in Chicago. So when I retired from the Air Force, I moved to Chicago, and I spent 10 years in a civil service with the Economic Development Association. So I was retired in 10 years from civil service after. So I was able to get 2 retirement pensions. So I'm very lucky. When we were flying C-130s, our unit was stationed in Okinawa, because we had to go down and fly the combat troops into combat zones, and they were dropped by parachute. And it was, they finally realized that it was much easier for helicopters to fly the troops in. We don't have to bail out on parachutes, just land them in the air. So they told us we don't have to go to Okinawa anymore. And our mission was ended as far as the 101st Airborne Infantry. So we were lucky to be relieved from that. Before I was stationed in the Columbus, they wanted me to fly F-105 fighters in Vietnam. So before I was transferred down there, they told me they ran out of F-105s. They were all shot down. So they switched me over to C-130s then. So I was lucky to get out of that.
What did you do in the days or weeks afterward?
Okay. When I retired from Chicago, I bought this cabin in to Grand Rapids, and I spent most of my time up there just doing nothing. And our cabin in Grand Rapids, I still have that now. So I go up there periodically and spend some time up there too. Otherwise, come back to Northfield and stay with my girlfriend.
What did you do after the Army?
Well, in order to keep flying, I bought a Cessna 172, and we were traveling back and forth according to the weather. And my banker says, you got to have a better airplane than that. So he had a 182, and he sold it to me, and he sold my 172. So I ended up with a 182, which was a much better airplane. So we did a lot of traveling back and forth with the Cessna.
After the service, did you join a veterans organization?
Well, yeah, I joined the Disabled American Veterans because I was disabled. So I joined the DAV, and I'm a life member in them now. So I didn't join the American Legion or the VFW because I was spending most of the time with the DAV.
Did you make any close friendships while in the service?
Yeah, I had a few my buddies I went through flying school with, and they all got killed during the war. Either crashed or enemy aircraft. So most of my buddies, well, one or two are still living on the East Coast someplace, and Bob Fisher was a good friend of mine, and he bought a racing boat, and he just disappeared. He went on a vacation with a racing boat. Other friends, I don't know what happened to them. I never kept in contact with them.
What did you go on to do as a career after the war?
I didn't have any ambition for a career. I just wanted to retire and relax and do nothing, fishing and hunting and so forth. So I'm happy the way I am.
Did your military experience influence you thinking about war or about the military in general?
Well, yes, I appreciate all the men and women that are fighting to keep our freedom going, but I don't agree with sending the troops over to foreign countries to fight their battles. But other than that, it's up to the president, whoever he wants to send the troops. And I don't have to agree with it if I don't know it, but I hope everything turns out and they can come home safely.
How did your service and experience affect your life?
Oh, I don't know. I don't really know how it affected everything, but I developed a lot of friends, and I developed a good retirement income, and that's all I was really wanting to do with my life, and so I found my girlfriend here in Northfield, and we live in happily ever after, and so that's about all I expect out of life. I'm happy.
Can you describe your tie?
Okay, this symbol for the Hump Pilots Association, and all of us pilots who flew the hump between Burma and China, you joined the CBI, and there's about 8,000 members now, and we meet once a year for a meeting and have a good reunion and fight the war all over again.